Hi, I'm Ted Campbell. I want to tell you a little bit about my latest publication. It's called Wesleyan Beliefs, Formal and Popular Expressions of the Core Beliefs of Wesleyan Communities. It's published by Kingswood Books and it was released in October 2010. To introduce this, I want to relate to you something that happened on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart on August 2nd of this year, 2010. Jon Stewart was interviewing a reporter about Chelsea Clinton's wedding. You may recall that Chelsea Clinton, a United Methodist, married a Jewish guy, and so they had a jointly Methodist-Jewish wedding. Jon Stewart asks his reporter, so what did they do to make the wedding Jewish? And she said, oh, they had the canopy, and they had a special Jewish marriage certificate, and the groom was wearing a prayer shawl, and so on and so forth. Then Jon Stewart asked the reporter, so what did they do to make it Methodist? The reporter pauses for a long time and she says, well, they had a minister. And Jon Stewart looks at the camera and he says, must be easy being a Methodist. It's like the University of Phoenix of religion. Well, I'm hoping that in some way this book will help us with this rather popular image of Methodism as a really, really bland group of people who stand for basically nothing.
The book shows that there has been a consistent core of beliefs taught by John and Charles Wesley, reinforced by Methodist churches in their hymnals, catechisms, and other publications, explicated by Methodist theologians, and enacted by Methodist people in giving testimonies to their own religious experience, in singing their faith, and even in the architectures of their worship spaces. I'm not, of course, the first to do this, but the approach I've taken differs in many ways from the ways in which my colleagues have approached the topic. Up to this point, the most common approach for talking about Methodist or Wesleyan beliefs has been a series of books on John Wesley's theology, beginning with Colin Williams's 1960 book entitled John Wesley's Theology Today. A slightly different approach was taken by Scott Jones and myself in books explicating Methodist doctrine, and by doctrine we meant teachings formally affirmed by Methodist churches. Scott's book focused specifically on doctrines affirmed by the United Methodist Church. My book takes up doctrines held in common by the AME Zion, CME, and United Methodist churches. But between the teachings of John and Charles Wesley and the formal doctrinal statements of Methodist churches, there's a range of materials like hymnals, catechisms, tracts, pamphlets, and books of theology written by Methodist theologians and authorized for the training of preachers. These sources have not been brought into a sustained account of Wesleyan beliefs, along with the teachings of the Wesleys themselves and the beliefs formally affirmed by Methodist churches. I've tried to create such a sustained account in the book on Wesleyan beliefs. Moreover, there is a range of expressions of Methodist teachings that comes from the popular side of Wesleyan communities, things like personal testimonies to religious experience, forms of worship in Methodist or Wesleyan churches, and the architectures of Methodist worship spaces. My book on Wesleyan beliefs also incorporates sources like these. Now I'll warn you that this is a fairly nerdy, scholarly book, designed for an academic audience, so it makes no pretense to being a popular book, even though it deals with popular expressions of Wesleyan beliefs. The book is richly documented, although it has no footnotes. That's because publishers today seem to regard footnotes as a very evil thing. So the book has endnotes rather than footnotes. Now the notes are important in a book like this. I mean, if an author claims that something was said or something happened in 1758, and there's a note, the reader doesn't know without looking at the note whether the reference is to the Reader's Digest, or Tippy Tugboat, or to one of the Reverend Joel Osteen's sermons, or perhaps to 3 18th century sources that actually document the point. And just to end the suspense, I can tell you that there are no references to Reader's Digest, Tippy Tugboat, or Joel Osteen in the book. Footnotes make this much easier for the reader, but they are becoming rare these days, and yet I'll tell you in a little bit how I did an end run against the publisher on this one. Here's how the book is organized. The first two chapters take up the theology of John Wesley. The first chapter asks what John Wesley believed to be the most central core or essential beliefs shared by Christians. In this chapter, I identify 10 common or ecumenical beliefs affirmed by John Wesley. The second chapter asks what John Wesley believed to be the most distinctive teachings of the Methodist movement. True to many earlier accounts, I do see the core of Wesley's distinctive teachings as lying in his beliefs about the way of salvation. But I also make the case that the general notion of religious experience was foundational and distinctive for Wesley, and I argue that his teaching about entire sanctification was the mark that distinguished his own movement from the broader evangelical revival in the 18th century. Chapter 3 takes up the verse of Charles Wesley and the ways in which his poetic contributions express the common or ecumenical beliefs that his brother John expressed, and also the distinctly Methodist beliefs that John had maintained. The next 3 chapters examine 3 core samples of particular beliefs as they came to expression, especially in the 19th century, in Methodist church communities. Chapter 4 looks at beliefs about God, including ways in which Methodist hymnals are structured, beginning consistently with hymns in praise of the Divine Trinity. This chapter also considers how Methodist theologians have grappled with the problem of evil, revealing a consistent tendency to emphasize divine love, sometimes at the expense of a traditional view of divine power. Chapter 5 offers a core sample of teachings about the way of salvation after the era of the Wesleys. Here I utilize the testimonies of 6 particular Methodist people, showing how they spoke of conviction, conversion, and sanctification as their way of describing the way of salvation. Chapter 6 offers a core sample of beliefs about the church. In this chapter, I focus on a consistent tension in Methodist thought about the church. A tension between a more traditional view of the church that requires faith, preaching, and the celebration of the sacraments, on the one hand, and a more missional understanding of the church, on the other hand, that has often prevailed in Methodist understandings. Chapter 7 is a very long chapter that offers my summary of 14 consistent beliefs taught by historic Wesleyan communities, 10 relatively common or ecumenical Christian teachings, and 4 teachings that are relatively distinctive of Wesleyan communities. And of course, I'm not going to tell you what they are in this video. Then you wouldn't have any reason to go out and buy the book for yourself and all your BFFs and all your relatives and all the members of your congregation. But Chapter 7 is also the part where I faked out the publisher. I guessed from the beginning that they were not going to allow footnotes, but I really wanted to convey to readers that these 14 teachings are grounded in a massive body of documentary evidence. So what I did was that on each of the 14 points, I wrote a source paragraph. The source paragraphs are kind of like those fine print passages in Bart's Dogmatics. Don't tell, but you know what? It's really footnote material. I was sure that the publishers would stand on the bridge of Khazad-dûm and say to my source paragraphs, "You may not pass." But you know what? They sneaked right past them, and they made it into the book. Shh, but don't tell. Seriously, I doubt that many readers will work through all the material in these 14 source paragraphs, but I think it's important to communicate that almost every one of these 14 points has a rather massive body of documentary evidence on behalf of Wesleyan churches and communities. It's important that readers see that body of evidence. After Chapter 7, there's a conclusion. What kind of book would it be if there wasn't a conclusion? And the conclusion says pretty much what I've said here. It even has a bibliography and an index, and if you buy it between now and December 31st, we'll throw in the bibliography and the index free of charge.
Okay, that's a little bit about my most recent publication, Wesleyan Beliefs, To John Stewart, I would like to say, give us a break, dude. To the rest of you, I would like to say, I hope the book turns out to be helpful. I hope that somehow it can contribute to building a sense of the core of beliefs that has traditionally been at the heart of Wesleyan communities. Thanks very much.